The Las Vegas Raiders might actually be interested in a quarterback based off of some of what we've seen up to this point. If you guys have not heard, the Raiders met with multiple quarterbacks. We're talking about in-person visits where they're bringing in guys like Quinn Ewers and other quarterbacks as well. We're talking about all-star games and the Raiders scouts essentially sitting down multiple quarterbacks and talking to these guys. And now the Raiders are also bringing in quarterback Sheduer Sanders of the Colorado Buffaloes. Shedeur is most likely a top 10 pick. Some people have talked about him potentially sliding. I don't think he goes past like the top 20 picks. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in the top, 7 or 8 picks as well. Shedeur Sanders is definitely, arguably quarterback 2, arguably quarterback 1. And he is coming into the Las Vegas Raiders facilities tomorrow specifically. He's flying to Las Vegas tonight. He has multiple pre-draft visits. And it seems like at this point, the Raiders are potentially in play for a quarterback. And I want to talk about why the Raiders are actually in play, as well as what they may actually be doing, which, maybe they're looking to potentially trade back. And we're going to get into that. Plus, obviously, there's a lot of news coming out over the past couple of days. Kolton Miller, some people are saying could actually be traded, which is kind of crazy to me. And the Raiders are bringing in some other interesting players that they could ultimately draft at pick 6, which we'll also kind of get into. But let's talk about this. When you think about the Raiders making that trade for Geno Smith, you're sending a message to the entire team. You're telling the entire team that we are looking to win today. We are looking to win as soon as this upcoming season, and we're not looking for, players that want to build long-term and potential and that type of stuff. We're going all in to try to win that Super Bowl this season, and I am confident that is the approach John Spytek and Pete Carroll will have with this roster. If there's guys that are not on board, maybe from a coaching element, they're going to get cut. We've already kind of seen that happen with Jack Jones. He got released by the Las Vegas Raiders. And now we're starting to see players that actually show up and are in the building start to actually get contract extensions, right? We've seen guys like Isaiah Pola-Mao, who has a really, really good work ethic. He was basically the first guy that the Raiders basically extended, right? Although he was a restricted free agent, the Raiders made sure that guy got paid and he got his money, and there'd be no questions about that. Maxx Crosby, another guy that works super hard. First guy that got that massive extension. And now the Raiders are starting to bring in quarterbacks, which could also look to potentially bring a guy in long term. Bringing in Geno Smith sends that message. But Geno Smith's contract is really interesting, right? We know it's really a 1-year contract. When you really look at some of these details, we understand that after 1 year, if the Raiders actually wanted to move on, the dead cap for that second year isn't all that much. Now, the Raiders are most likely not going to cut Geno Smith after 1 season, but the out is there if the Raiders wanted to go down that path. To me, what this means is that the Raiders look at it like, hey, with pick 6, we might take best player available. If it's not a quarterback, it's not a quarterback. But in round 2, if some guy slips and he happens to have that type of upside that we really, really value, right? Jalen Milroe is the guy that some people are saying is going to end up going in the first round because of the upside, the traits, the physicality, right? That this guy has kind of shown from that quarterback position. And he's not a perfect quarterback, but he's a solid quarterback with a ton of upside. Sheduer Sanders, another quarterback. People are like, has so much upside. His best football still in front of him. And that doesn't include the guys like Quinn Ewers, who probably should have went back to school. Will Howard has a ton of upside. Some people are saying, if those way he could have went back, that would have benefited him as well. And these are guys that could have easily risen, right, as next season kind of came along if they were able to have good seasons. To me, if the Raiders want to try to take some of these guys with high upside, they might actually be there with the second, with our second round pick. And with Sheduer Sanders coming to town, the Raiders could actually be in play. Now, there's also another possibility, which I think we have to realistically talk about. The Raiders may actually just be looking for another team that potentially want to jump up, right? Another team that's willing to actually make that leap to the 6th overall pick and take the quarterback. There's a report that Derek Carr has a shoulder injury, which can keep him out at the for the 2025 season, right? Or at least for a part of that 2025 season. And here's the thing with the Saints. The Saints have also kind of went all in, and they've kind of been doing this for the last 10 years essentially. It goes back to the Drew Brees era, right? As that era was kind of coming to an end, they continuously went all in. Never really worked out for them. They went all in with Derek Carr a couple years back. Has not obviously worked out. They've had a really good defense. They built some really, really good. They built a couple different positional units, right? They had some good receivers at one point. Then the offensive line kind of fell apart. But there's a report that the Raiders might actually want one of these other teams to potentially jump up. In fact, some people have even said that the Saints are going to move off of Derek Carr soon, right? That was a part of guaranteeing him that money that they ended up guaranteeing him. I think they gave him like $30 million at the beginning of this offseason. Part of that was apparently to shift around some of the cap hits to future years, which would allow them to release him a little bit easier and have some more flexibility this season. Regardless, it seems like there are teams that may want a quarterback, and the Raiders are trying to get one of these teams to jump up. And another thing we have to know is there's other teams in this draft that could take a quarterback, but they pick a little bit later on, right? The Miami Dolphins are a good example. I know they have Tua under contract, but Tua's, he hasn't been healthy, and I think Mike McDaniel probably realizes this is his last year with the Dolphins, unless he makes the playoffs and makes an actual push in the playoffs. And I don't think that's going to happen with Tua. And I think, even if you miss the playoffs with a rookie quarterback that you took in the first round, I think the Dolphins would stick with a guy like Mike McDaniel. But they're a team that could be in play for a quarterback. The Cowboys could be in play for a quarterback as well. The Steelers probably are going to be in play for a quarterback. And, of course, the Saints will be another team. So there's a chance the Raiders are trying to get one of these teams to jump up. Obviously, best case scenario for the Raiders is you can go from pick 6 and drop back to pick 9, which is what the Saints are. Maybe you get an extra third-round pick. And with that instance, the Raiders can still get one of the best players in this class. That means we'll get 2 quarterbacks to essentially go. We might get 2 receivers, 2 corners, 2 tight ends potentially, right? Some people are saying that we might get 2 tight ends in the top 15 picks. This could benefit the Raiders, right? So I think there's a lot of different strategies that John Spytek is trying to implement. But I also think there's a real chance the Raiders could actually just take a quarterback in their own right. I think, if you're the Raiders and you think about this roster and kind of where it's at, yes, drafting the best player available obviously makes us a lot better. But imagine if Sheduer Sanders ends up being the next CJ Stroud, right? CJ Stroud took the Houston Texans in 1 year into the playoffs in basically back-to-back years, right? His first 2 years, the Texans made the playoffs. If Sheduer Sanders is that next CJ Stroud type of quarterback, he could potentially get the Raiders into the playoffs, and he can even sit for a year and a half if that's what the Raiders really wanted to do. But there's also that possibility that, hey, if Shedeur is the guy and we draft him, he could easily just take over for Geno even as soon as this season, right? Like, that's not out of the question mark. We saw that happen with Kirk Cousins just this past season. Trading for Geno makes sure you have a quarterback this year. Bringing in a rookie makes sure you have that long-term option. It doesn't matter when you draft him. It doesn't matter really if your quarterback's under contract. We'll see what ends up happening, man. There's just a lot of really, really interesting things and approaches that the Raiders could potentially take. I want to talk a little bit about Kolton Miller. One of the interesting reports and rumors, and I think it's more rumor than actual report, is that Kolton Miller could potentially be a trade candidate for the Las Vegas Raiders. Some people are saying that he's the top free agent in 2026. He's the guy that every team is going to say, if this guy becomes a free agent, we want to potentially bring him in. And if teams are saying that, I think that should also kind of be a hint to the Raiders. I think it'd be a huge mistake not bringing back Kolton Miller. And so many people have started to talk about this. I'm pretty sure someone out there within the Raiders media started to talk a little bit about Miller and potentially trading for him. The Raiders could probably net maybe a low-end first-round pick, right? I think a team like the Chiefs, obviously we're not going to trade him to the Chiefs specifically, but a team like that has a good quarterback that needs a left tackle could say, let's bring in Kolton Miller. The Ravens are an example, right? They might need a left tackle. Kolton Miller could be an example of a player that could go to a team like that, right? I don't see the Raiders actually trading away Kolton Miller. It doesn't really make sense. Someone said that, hey, Kolton Miller's been here for 7-8 years, and he's good, but is he great? And I also want to remind people that in the entire time that Kolton Miller was with the Raiders have yet to figure out the right tackle position. So if you trade Kolton Miller, chances are you're not going to find that next left tackle for a number of years, right? Finding good offensive tackles is not that easy, right? Especially if you're a team that's having success, right? Like the Chiefs, for example. The Chiefs are unable to find starting caliber tackles. Both their left tackle and right tackle is an absolute mess. And they paid their right tackle $20 million. He's just not that good, right? And the Chiefs are a great example of this. You got a couple other teams that have struggling guys, right? Like the Ravens, another team where their left tackle, and they paid an older tackle that was injury prone. And, Ronnie Stanley's always kind of getting hurt over the course of the season, missing games. He's great when he's healthy, but he's not healthy all that often. And with Kolton Miller, Miller's been fairly healthy over the course of his career. He has missed time over the past 2 seasons. I should say, in the past 3 seasons. This past season, he was fairly healthy for the entire season. But the 2 seasons before that, he didn't miss like the final 5 or 6 games because of the same nagging shoulder injury. And I say last year he wasn't fully healthy because although he played in every game, the shoulder, same shoulder, he had to get surgery on it, right? Or he decided to finally get surgery on it. And that kind of limited his off season a little bit. But again, I think Kolton Miller is also one of the better tackles in the NFL. And I think it'd be a mistake for the Raiders not to extend him. In fact, if you guys look at his contract right now, very team-friendly contract. You know, when Miller initially signed this contract, I was actually surprised that he only got about $18 million a year. Now, I know that's probably what, you know, Miller should have gotten when he signed this 3 years back, but the cap hits are really, really favorable. Right, $15 million this year. That's really, really favorable for Kolton Miller. Again, even at that $18 million mark, if you look at the NFL's offensive tackles, Miller ranks way down here, right? He's basically tied as the 18th highest paid tackle, right? To me, I don't know if I would say Kolton Miller is the 20th or 18th, whatever you want to say, best tackle in the NFL. I think he's better than that. I would make the argument Kolton Miller is probably right around the 10 mark here. I'd argue he's better than all of these tackles here, right? I think the only one of these guys that Kolton Miller might not be better than is Spencer Brown of the Buffalo Bills. I think Spencer Brown's one of the top 5 tackles in the NFL. Really, really good player. If you haven't watched his tape, highly suggest you guys check that out. Even guys like Laramie Tunsil. I know Tunsil was really good at one point. He struggled a lot this past season. I don't even know if he's better than Kolton Miller at this point. He's getting paid $25 million. Andrew Thomas is good, but I don't see a huge difference between Andrew Thomas and Kolton Miller. You know, you can make the argument for like some of these guys, Mulata, Darisaw, Sewell, Werps. All of these guys are probably better than Kolton Miller. But again, you know, you can kind of see the value. And the thing is like if Miller gets paid, you know, right about here, keeping in mind these are all older contracts, he'll get about $22 million, which again for a top 10 tackle in the NFL, I think is about right. And you know, let's say you do get a high-end first-round pick. What do you do with that? Right? Pick 28. Which offensive lineman would you draft in this class as an example? There's just not a lot of tackles that are available that end up having success. Now, obviously, there's a formula to draft tackles, and that is you take the top 2 tackles in any given class. This class might not be a good example of that, but like last year, you know, if the Raiders got Olu Fashanu, we would have had a 10-year starter at offensive tackle. The year before that, if the Raiders took a guy like Darnell Wright, which he was right there for us, we'd have a top 5 right tackle. If the Raiders drafted, you know, the years before that, Christian Darisaw over Alex Leatherwood, we'd have a top 5 tackle, right? So as long as you pick the right tackle, right, and it has to be a top 10 guy, unless it's a deep tackle class, right? Like when we saw Penei Sewell and Darisaw and Rashawn Slater and a bunch of other tackles that came out in that class. Generally speaking, you get a tackle in the top 10, you put the investment in, it'll be a good football player. But not every class is like that. And I think if the Raiders start to win here, we're not going to pick in the top 10 as we kind of go forward, right? So the theory behind trading Kolton Miller and trying to win a Super Bowl just doesn't make sense to me. So again, I hope the Raiders get that right. You guys see what the cap dollars is. You know, the cap will go up about $5 million, but I think Kolton Miller's worth it. There's another interesting report that came out that, you know, it's kind of interesting to me. And I'm open to the Raiders actually potentially trading Aidan O'Connell. I think it was Vic Tafer of The Athletic that basically put it out there. And he didn't say it specifically like the Raiders are shopping Aidan O'Connell, but he kind of hinted it in one of his articles. And, you know, it's interesting to me because Aidan O'Connell's one of those quarterbacks that just has a ton of upside, has a ton of potential. There's, you know, with Aidan O'Connell, he can make every pass, and we know that, right? But I also think Aidan O'Connell is kind of limited to the type of coach that he can play under. You know, Jared Goff is an example of a quarterback that I think is similar to Aidan O'Connell. Obviously, Goff has a lot more experience, and he's played under 2 of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL, in Sean McVay and Ben Johnson, which is obviously going to help him a lot. But if Aidan O'Connell gets paired up with those type of coaches, I think he could have success. And Sean McVay is also looking for a quarterback. You know, I would love for the Raiders to be able to put Aidan O'Connell into a situation and a scheme that could potentially allow him to have success. Obviously, Aidan O'Connell is not Matthew Stafford. Totally understand that. But I would actually love for the Raiders to move off of Aidan O'Connell, especially if we can get like a 5th-round pick for him. You know, we drafted him in the 4th round. I don't think we would get that for him at this point. although he has probably outproduced that 4th round value, given the upside that he has, I think for the Raiders, it would be smart to move off of Aidan O'Connell. We do have to realize that right now we have the Pete Carroll scheme. Pete Carroll is going to retire one day, and I think Chip Kelly is going to be one of the favorites to become the Raiders head coach at that point. I think Chip Kelly will probably be our offensive coordinator for the next 2 to 3 years, and I think as soon as Pete Carroll is ready to retire, I think Chip Kelly takes over. So with that, the quarterback that Chip Kelly wants and is going to essentially pick over the next year or two in the draft, that's going to be the quarterback for the Raiders long term. And of course, Aidan O'Connell was not Chip Kelly's guy, and I think he wouldn't be able to run Chip Kelly's offensive scheme either, right? So again, I think for the Raiders, it would be smart to move off of a guy like Aidan O'Connell. 5th round pick is better than nothing. Now, obviously, best case scenario, he could be our backup this year in case Geno goes down. Aidan O'Connell can step in. But the one thing we do have to realize with that right there is that the scheme and system that we're going to build for Geno Smith is going to be built for Geno Smith, not for Aidan O'Connell. So Aidan O'Connell will have to come into a scheme and system that's kind of built around Geno. And not saying that he can't come in and run what Geno Smith's running, but the offensive approach is going to be a little bit different, right? So again, I'm actually, I wouldn't be surprised if Aidan O'Connell is still here because he is under contract and he's a high-end backup quarterback. But I do think the Raiders would be smart to move Aidan O'Connell where he still has value. He still has 2 years left on his rookie contract. Someone will trade for that. I would have said Josh McDaniels initially, like, hey, he's the one that drafted him, send him over there. But the Patriots actually ended up bringing in a backup quarterback already, a veteran backup quarterback. And I don't think they want to have any sort of, hey, is Drake May the future? Oh, he throws an interception. Let's see what Aidan O'Connell has, right? I don't think they want that kind of happening, so they would never trade for Aidan. But I do think Aidan would be a potential, maybe he's he's the guy that Matthew Stafford retires in a year. Aidan kind of takes over, give him a year or two. If he proved himself under Sean McVay, great. If not, they kind of move forward with the quarterback that they want to get as well. Right? Again, I just think this is good value for those teams and for the Raiders. You're kind of pivoting where you're saying Geno Smith's our quarterback now, and we're going to develop quarterback X or Y, right? So I think that'd be the smart thing, but we'll see what ends up happening. And then finally, the Raiders are visiting with a wide receiver, and this guy's busy as hell, which is kind of crazy. But Jordan Schultz, arguably the best insider out there, said his source is telling him that Arizona wide receiver Tetroy McMillan has visited the Cowboys, the Raiders, the Chargers, the Patriots, the Browns, the Seahawks, Panthers, and Saints. I'm told he has 3 more visits lined up as well. One executive from a 2024 playoff team said he's got the true star level tools and elite production. Our entire building loves him. There's just no way he makes it to us. I want to talk about Tetroy McMillan, and more than that, I want to talk about the Raiders wide receivers a little bit. I think it is very, very important for the Raiders to add playmakers in this draft. And I think it's more important to add playmakers than it is to add offensive linemen, right? Because I think with DJ Glaze, I want to see what this guy has in his second season. Worst case scenario, the Raiders can write this season off if that's what they choose to do by seeing what Malcolm Koonce has, what Tyree Wilson has, find out what Alex Kappa and Dylan Parham have, and find out what DJ Glaze has, right? Find out what all the young guys have. You get 1 year to prove yourself. Otherwise, you'll be a backup next year. And with that, I also think the Raiders need wide receivers, right? We really don't have difference makers. Jacoby Myers is a good wide receiver, and I don't want to say he's a bad player. And the last time I talked about him a couple days back, people were like, "Hey, you're selling Jacoby Myers short." I'm not selling Jacoby Myers short. I know he's a good wide receiver, but is he elite? Is Jacoby Myers going to catch a slant route or a screen and take it 50, 60 yards and make multiple people miss? The answer is no, he's not doing that, right? That's just the realistic part of Jacoby Myers' game. Now, Jacoby's a great number 2 wide receiver, and that's okay, right? There's great number 2 wide receivers out there. For the longest time, Amari Cooper was a number 2 wide receiver, and some places inserted him as a number 1 wide receiver, but he had his most success kind of being with CeeDee Lamb. The Cowboys had Michael Gallup, where he had a really good 2 years as well. And, Amari Cooper's an example of this. Jerry Jeudy's another example of this. These are guys that are like number 2 wide receivers, but they're elite number 2 wide receivers. And I think Jacoby Myers is an elite number 2 wide receiver. He can beat almost any cornerback out there. He can create separation. He's like Hunter Renfrow, but better, basically, right? He's faster, he's quicker. And Jacoby Myers is a really, really good wide receiver, but we need to add a difference maker. We need to add Brock Bowers to that wide receiver. Now, Brock Bowers is also most likely not going to take a screen 60, 70 yards to the house. Right? Justin Jefferson will do that. CeeDee Lamb will do that. Jamar Chase will do that. We need that type of player. Malik Neighbors, another guy that could probably do that, right? He's a guy that I think has huge upside at wide receiver as well. He kind of did some of that stuff last year. The Raiders need to add that type of playmaker, right? Like, that's what we 100% need right now. And I don't think Tetra McMillan's that guy, to be honest. I think Travis Hunter definitely is. And I think Kyle Williams is another guy that has that in his game. I think Kyle Williams can go top 15. I know some people are going to disagree with that. I think he's going to be the second wide receiver taken. And you know, it's funny to me when people are always like, who the hell's Kyle Williams? Watch his tape, man. Like, go out there and actually watch and have your own opinion of guys. You know, we know for a fact that a lot of what we're told during this, at this point, a lot of this stuff doesn't actually happen. And people are like always surprised, but that's just what it is, right? NFL teams are going to value guys how they want to value guys. Darnell Wright was a great example of this, where people are like, he's a second round pick, and he ended up being the second tackle in that class. And I think he's the best out of that class right now. We saw guys like this past season, Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. People are like, man, that's a 5th round pick. Look at his tape. He ended up being like the 3rd or 4th tackle taken. He's a 1st round pick, right? To me, you know, Tetra McMillan could be a really good football player, but is he a difference maker? I'm not 100% sure, right? But the Raiders do have to add a difference maker. Love Jacoby Myers. We need that guy opposite of Jacoby. Trey Tucker's not that guy. At least he hasn't shown it. Trey might be a great deep threat one day, but he's not that yet. And if he does develop into that, and if he is that, great. Now you got 3 difference makers from your receivers. I think it's more important to get a wide receiver that's elite than a running back that's elite, right? So we'll see what ends up happening, man. I think, you know, the Raiders are going to look a lot different literally in 15 days from now, right? Because the draft is like 10, 11 days away. So we're going to look a lot different in 15 days from now. We're going to add multiple players. Let me know what you guys think, man. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'll be doing a couple more mock drafts. And I'm also going to do a video here soon where I'm going to just go over like the top 12 guys that we can take in the 1st round and just give you my thoughts and opinions on all 12 of those guys, right? So let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.